today, but I'm going to use the mic so I don't have to yell. So I'm going to do a walk around. So I'm based in Portland, Oregon, a professional. I apprenticed under Michael Hagedorn, and my focus is to grow trees from scratch. So I grow trees from seed and from cutting, and I am trying to teach my techniques all over the country because I think we have a big hole. We have a fairly good amount of knowledge around how to deal with a finished tree or an almost finished tree, but there's a big hole of knowledge between how do we go from a seed to a tree that's going to be in the show. So that's a big gap of knowledge that we have. So I really am trying to learn the technique, and I'm trying to teach that technique. Now, what I have to do, and what we all have to do when we're learning the technique often, is we have to learn to reverse engineer the tree. So we're looking at the finished tree in the show, and we have to figure out what the mountains did to that tree to make it look the way it did, or what the professional did to that tree, or what the grower did to that tree to make the tree look like the tree that is right now. So we're going to walk around and we're going to talk about technique that we would use to get the tree to where it's at. Now I've got a little hands-on demo today, so I'm going to pass around a chunk of wire. I've got a wire cutter here with some wound up wire. If I run out of the pre-cut pieces, just cut a piece about this long and pass it on to the next person. So I'm going to pass these around. Grab here, I'll let you just grab the wad of pre-cuts and let me have one of those. That's good.
Sorry.
And I'll pass the uncuts this way. So yeah, just cut yourself a chunk of wire and you'll see what to do with it in a little bit.
I think he wants that one.
I'm going to have the whole group, let's swing around where we can see this table. I wasn't anticipating this elm table here. This is a great introduction to sort of what we're going to be talking about today. So these 5 trees are all elm trees. They're different kinds of elm, but that's irrelevant. They're all elm trees. And so what we're going to see in the show today is this final tree, this tree that's getting closer to finished. But what we don't see in the show today, with the exception of this table, is the journey that the tree took to get to where it's at. So, like I mentioned, I mostly start with seedling and cutting their seed. And so my yard has a lot of this in it. And so we're going to demystify some of the steps to get it across the table, okay? Because there's everybody knows there's quite a lot of steps to get across the table. One other thing, you'll have to get my attention, but I really appreciate feedback or questions if you have questions or comments. So just blurt it out or get my attention if you have any questions as we go through.
Feel free to wire it if you want to.
Oh, right. So the work that we do in these first couple of steps is that we're typically going to do root work because the tree can respond to root work very well when it's young. So we're going to root work the tree we want trees that have roots that we call it an abari, a nice spread of roots all the way around the trunk. And so we're going to do that work when the tree is fairly young so that we can utilize the tree's strength when it's young. Once it's slowed down and older, then it has a hard time developing some of those techniques. So we're going to really work on that here. Oh, here, I'll take it. If anyone needs a wire, I've got some pre-cuts here. Yeah, just take the whole bunch of them. Pass it around if anyone doesn't have it. The other thing we're going to do, and it wasn't the case on this one, but we're going to also wire the tree and add trunk movement because once we get to this size, we're not going to be able to manipulate the trunk with wire. So if we want the trunk to have wire, then we need to do that when the tree is this size. This tree is still quite flexible, and so we can add quite a bit of movement when the tree is this size, but once the tree is this size, we have limited possibilities for getting movement, okay? So what are our possibilities to get movement on a tree like this? If we can't wire, what do we do to get movement?
Chop the trunk.
Yeah, chop the trunk is really our biggest option, right? So cutting the trunk off will give us 2 things. What are the 2 things it's going to give us in relationship to building a tree? What do we get out of the trunk chop?
Taper.
We get taper, so we go from a large trunk to a small trunk, right? And that's giving us an illusion of a big tree in a small pot. We want a lot of taper, so we want the tree to go from fairly wide to fairly small in a small amount of space. Unless it's a couple of different styles of bonsai, we don't necessarily want that, but for the most part, we want taper, and then we already mentioned movement. So we get out of this tree, we're getting an instant movement to the right. When we made this trunk chop, the tree sprouted out to the right. So we get a lot of movement out of this tree, and we get a lot of taper when we do this, okay? Now, at this point, we could add movement to these with wire. These sprouts that grew, we could add movement to them, or we could just choose to chop again. And we would develop the tree by chopping over and over rather than by wire. So sometimes we use wire, sometimes we use chopping. Andrew Robson teaches this as Morse code, so we have dashes and dots. And if we want a really fine, really small shohin, then we typically use only cuts. Cut. We don't use much wire because we want those movements to be really small and tight. If you look at chochibai quints in show books in Japan, with these really tight 1/4 inch movements, those were all cuts. So we can do 4 cuts a year in our environment on a chochibai, and on a branch this long you might see 60 cuts. So tiny little, so then 60 times 3 or 4, you're looking at a 20-year process of developing a branch this long on a chochibai. But if you think about this kind of long leggy growth versus a cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, that looks a lot nicer. So if we're developing little trees, we can't afford to have long leggy parts of our trees. So we have to either add wire like you've got in your hand, or we've got to do cuts on that, okay? So then let's further the process on. We did a chop here. This tree probably has a chop here, if I were guessing. We got a lot of branches out of that. This is kind of a broom style. And then we're going to continue cutting this tree. So this tree is probably, again, mostly going to be a cut tree because we don't want this nice short movement, and then a long straight leggy. Okay, so we're going to continue the technique. And I think it's a little simplified to talk about it this way, but bonsai is the application of fairly simple techniques done over and over and over at the right time. Okay, so we learn a dozen techniques, and then we religiously apply them to the tree at the right time, at the right location, and so that's where the complication comes. Is like, what's the right time? What do I do? I don't know what to do right now. But they're fairly simple techniques. We just need to learn to apply them sort of at the right time. Okay, and then the last tree here, again, this one, essentially think of this tree, this is a cultivar, but it's been cut back so it's got a lot finer, shorter internodes between the cut, okay? So this tree looks like it's been cut maybe 3 times, and then it's been pruned back to be kind of ready for the show. So we go from the start of the tree to getting close to the show for a tree, okay? See if you have any questions about this table before we move on to the actual show. Okay, let's go to the far end table, because those are the other end of the table, or the last table I think is trees more in development, so we can kind of see the beginning, but then we'll back up to some other trees. Get to where you can see this fine specimen. Okay, so this is a Shimpaku juniper. Any ideas about how old it is? Any guesses? 50. Yeah, 50 I would say. 50 to 75 I would say. And do you imagine it's a man-made tree, or is it a collected out of the mountains tree? I think it's probably man-made, yeah. This is a created tree. Okay, so we're going to utilize the wire in your hand now. Okay, what I want to do, let's see, can I get a wire? Are there extras, or did it? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you so much for carrying that along. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to put a really quick loop at the bottom. Like this, just a little crook. And I do that because that's my front. This is my front. You know, when it's lined up like a shotgun, that's my front, okay? That just helps me kind of keep myself organized. Okay, and then what you're gonna do is, this exercise is called the heart of the tree. So if we take this tree and we shave it down, inside of this tree is a seedling this size, right? there's something this size in the middle. So if you imagine putting this in a pencil sharpener, sharpening it down till it's this size, okay? Then as a grower, I have to think, what are the movements that were put into this tree when it was straight, when it was a straight whip? What movements were put into it to create this? This tree is almost all wire bent, and so we need to think about what kind of movements. So let me, can I get you to hold this? Okay, let me show you some examples. So I'm gonna wire this whip. This is my whip. Okay, here's my whip. Okay, so how large can this tree ever become? How much girth can this trunk ever gain before I have a problem? And what is the problem?
1.5 inches.
It's the diameter of the smallest curve, right? It's the distance between the smallest curve. And why? Why will that become a problem? Yeah, it's going to grow together, right? So this side of the curve and this side of the curve are going to grow together, right? So if I wire a little whip like this, then what size is my finished tree going to be? Am I going to be able to create this tree with this wire? No. This is going to be a tiny little shohin. Okay, and I call this a calligraphy tree. This is a little shohin bunjin. We'll probably see a few of these in the show today. So the final height is really about where it is, and I'm not going to be able to get very girthy. So this tree might get as girthy as a dime, but not much more because it's going to grow into each other. Okay, let me undo my work. Oh, one quick thing. What could I do if I wanted a bigger tree? I've got this whip. What can I do if I wanted a bigger tree? With my whip. I can open the loops, but it's already a set whip. It's already set. I can cut it. That's right. So I'm going to cut it right here. And that opens up my loop, and then I can go as big as I want, right? Okay.
What if you make deadwood on the inside of the curves? Would it?
Yeah. Okay. Juniper plays with a different set of rules, right? Juniper, we can kill off the inside of the curve, and we can buy ourselves a little time. So if we have a really tight curve like that, if I kill off the inside, then the tree is only growing outward, and I can buy a fair amount of time. So Juniper does break the rules. Juniper plays by its own rules in general. Different than any other species, but juniper plays by its own rules. So yeah, we can do that with juniper. Okay, so let me look at this. So I've now bent up my little whip here. How large can this tree become?
Much larger.
Couple of inches, yeah. We can get that large, right, before causing problems. So this can be a fairly large tree. Okay, well, let's see this one. How girthy can this tree become?
Big as you want, probably.
Really as big as we want, right? Okay, now at what size will we lose the interest in this curve? See the curve there? When it gets the size of my leg, what kind of movement are we going to see? Hardly any, right? It's just going to go wiggle, right? Because when it's that big, it's going to do that, right? So if we want a big movement on a big tree, what kind of initial movement do we need to do? Extremely big movement, right? We need to have really aggressive movement so that big tree doesn't absorb the curve, okay? So when I started my nursery 5 years ago, I made a lot of really cute trident maples because I wanted really twisted trident maples, and I bent them all up like this. And then 2 years later, they were starting to grow together, and they weren't much bigger than my thumb, and I said, that's a mistake. I want a twisty tree, but I want a big twisty tree. Well, of course, this can't produce a big twisty tree. This is going to produce a little twisty tree, right? So that's what we need to think about when we're doing this initial work. Okay, so you've got your wire, and you've got your bend on it, and I want you to just imagine what curves go into this tree and bend your wire according to create this tree out of your seedling. Junipers, because they are one of the more interesting trees that we develop. To begin with, typically with junipers, we don't do any chopping on them. We don't have trunk chops like we have on deciduous and on pines. We don't grow the trunk really large and then make a big cut because junipers don't really heal the same way. They don't play the same rules, okay? They don't play with the same rules. So typically, we have a single trunk line with a lot of interest in it, and then we build the tree off of that trunk line. Okay, so everybody got their answers, and there's no wrong answers. Oh yes, there is. Okay, show me some of hold up your things, okay? Okay, and then look at your neighbors and do a critique on your neighbor. You're wrong. Give some feedback to your neighbor about how tight the curves are. You know, obviously without, the owner here is standing by because I'm talking about shaving his tree down to the size of a pencil. So he's a little nervous with obviously we're not going to do that to the tree, but this is a good exercise to try to think through what is in the core of that, because really what's in the core of that is a seedling, right? And so if we're building trees from scratch, we have to think about what it is, how it goes from this tree 50 years ago to the tree now in the show. Okay, one thing we want to think about, hold your seedling up, and then let me talk about a couple of things as we develop seedlings. Everybody look at my great, this is my great work. I've been doing this as a professional a long time. Look at that work. Hey, does this tree have a lot of movement in it? Yeah, it does have a lot of movement. Is this a great tree?
No.
What's the main problem with this tree? It's two-dimensional, right? Yeah, if you look at it this way, let me show you this way. It's ramrod straight, okay? So when I'm bending a seedling, I give it a bunch of movement, and then I twirl it in my hands to make sure I have three-dimensional movement, because obviously we look at a tree mostly at two-dimension, but when I'm starting out bending a seedling, I'm not already determining what the front is, so I have to make sure that it has interest in 360. So then I'm going to go in, I'm going to say, okay, well maybe I'll bend this way, and I'll add interest in 3 dimensions, okay? I'm also kind of looking for S-curves and C-curves and pigtails. I don't want to make a juniper with a bunch of pigtails on it. That looks like a man-made it and not a mountain, right? We're trying to create trees that look like mountains. So I'll twirl the seedling in my fingers and just make sure that I have good movement. So again here, it's pretty straight there. It's nice and movement there, straight there. So I'm going to just manipulate it a little bit. Now I really like, when I'm bending seedlings, I like to put on a podcast that has nothing to do with bonsai and zone out into my my mind palace, because I don't want to think about it, because when I think about it I make pigtails. So I like to zone out and just bend mindlessly. I like having people over to my house to bend for me because they bend differently than me, so my whole yard doesn't look the same. I have a lot of interest and creativity in the yard that just kind of comes out of other people. Okay, any questions about this? And we're going to move to another tree. Okay, so again, junipers play by their own rules. We'll talk a little bit about trunk chops in a minute. We don't really have that. What we have is a lot of movement and a lot of twist. If you look at this tree, not only do we have static movement, but we have twist in addition to. So we're going to twist the seedling prior to bending on a juniper. So if you haven't looked at this tree closely, look at this tree really closely before you leave. It's a great little tree. Okay, we're going to go to the opposite. Oh, yes.
So if they grow together, what's so bad about that? Because it seems to me like that would just add funky character to it.
Yeah, we have to kind of, funky character is a little different problems. And sometimes we do see funky character, but oftentimes what we see is what I call a baby fist or a lollipop. We have a straight thing and then a big burl and then a straight thing or a curvy thing. So sometimes the growing together, especially on a juniper, can sometimes be interesting, but for the most part, we have visual problems, like artistic problems, but also just horticultural problems where the line veins are merging and killing each other off, sort of thing. So typically we don't like to see these, what we commonly refer to as reverse tapers. And that's fire as best we can. What kind of tree is this?
Ponderosa pine. It's a ponderosa.
Oh, it is ponderosa. Ponderosa?
Yeah.
Ponderosa, sorry. Really nice deal. Ponderosa. Yeah. Being a Ponderosa was most like collected, right? Collected in the mountains. But we have to think about how we're going to build this as builders, right? So, if we were to build this tree, how would you bend your wire? And I'll tell you right now, it's a trick question in some ways. Got to get a full view of the tree if you haven't looked at the whole tree. And then I want you to bend your wire according to, if you were going to build this tree in your yard, how would you bend your wire?
Get in there, man. Have a look at it.
Then the rest is just all clipping.
Okay, you should be ready. Everybody should be done. Okay, hold up your example. Okay, I see mostly correct answers. Okay, so what you mentioned it over here. How is this tree? How would we build this tree if we were to build the tree? Show me your wire. Okay, and why is that your wire?
Well, pines have a tendency to have clumps of, so I would just bend it the initial way and then just use branches to go the direction I want to go.
Yeah, and if you look at this tree, that's exactly what happened. So the original trunk line was this dead wood, and then that died off, and this branch took over, and then it died off, and this branch took over, and it died off, and this branch took over, and then it died off, and this branch took over, and then a deer stomped on it. Okay? So this is a great example of what we would call a cut and grow tree. We do have a little wire movement. If you really wanted to mimic the trunk line of the tree, you would have added a little something at the end for your gin. Okay, but we're really going to kill off this part of the tree, and then we have a little branch that grew there, and then we're going to grow the tree from that branch, right? So everybody see that? Everybody understand how that's happening? So I'll explain it again. This was a tree, and it was growing out to here, and then it died. There was a branch, and it looks like here, it was growing all the way out here, and then it died, and then it grew this branch, and it died, and then that. Okay, so this is a pretty good example of how we build, especially black pines. Most pines we are building this way, especially larger pines, and we also mostly build deciduous this way. So on a larger tree, we don't need a lot of movement in the base because we're going to be cutting it off anyway. We'll look at some smaller trees later and we'll see that there's almost no movement initially because we're looking to make a cut in the tree or to kill off part of the tree and build a tree. Because what does this give us other than interesting deadwood? What does this dying off give us? Again, two things. Well, I guess a sense of age, but we get movement and taper out of making that change. So we're making that change, and we get movement and taper out of that change. I think that if we're building the best trees possible, we have at least 5 points of change. So this tree has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is a 5 taper tree. Now, obviously, it was mostly built in the mountains, but if we're building a tree like this, it's a 5 taper tree. So I say the best trees have around 5 taper because it's a lot more convincing in a small pot to be a small tree if we have all of this tapering movement rather than just having a tree that's relatively straight. Because you mentioned age. This gives us a large, grand sense of age, right? By having this. If we see a redwood seedling, then it's the same size from the base to the top. It's long and straight and has no interest in it. We see a really old redwood, then it's got a lot different look. It's tapered very strongly, it's very tall, so if we're trying to get that look in a small pot, then we have to figure out how to manipulate that tree. Okay, any questions about this or how we would work on a tree like this? Okay, so straighten your wire out again.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay, so now we're going to do a harden tree exercise with this tree. Everybody got your seedling? Okay, you're done. This is the tree, right? So this tree, what form of style is this tree? Yeah, semi-formal upright. So we do have a little movement to the trunk, but not much. And we're starting with a fairly straight seedling. Now, where did the tree get shot? There's a pretty big cut, not anymore, but right here you can see a big change in taper. So there's a wound in the back that you see, it's mostly healed, that happened about right here in the tree. Okay? And then if you look really closely, there's another one about here in the tree, and then we turn into crown. So this tree probably had more than we can see because it's a very old tree. We've got a lot of nice bark on this tree, but you can still visualize two trunk chops that happen on this tree from the grove. Now, when we make the cut, again, we get a lot of taper and we get a lot of movement. The crown comes forward of us with the first chop, and then with the second chop, it tips back a little bit, so it's not too far forward. This is a very well-developed tree, but again, if we're building formal and semi-formal uprights, we just essentially start with a seedling, and then we talked about, or someone mentioned earlier about pines have what we call whorls, so they put all the branches here, and then put all the branches here, and put all the branches here. And so we are going to begin developing something in here to be the new trunk, and then all of this is what we call sacrificial growth, and at some point we're going to make a cut there and rebuild the tree off of that lower growth. So pines, most trees, but pines in particular, they want to be tall, straight trees. And so they will often kill off a lot of this lower growth in order to be really tall and straight and strong. And so we have to utilize some techniques as growers to keep this lower stuff alive and thriving, because eventually at 5 or 6 years old, it will abandon the lower stuff because we don't really see these wide bush pine trees, mostly we see tall, straight pine trees. Okay, any questions about the work we're looked at here? Yes.
Previously you mentioned 5 points of taper. Can you call those out on the screen?
Yeah, so previously I mentioned 5 points of taper. This tree, I can only see 3 points of taper on this tree, but that doesn't mean anything because this tree is very old. So the taper points are, eventually the taper points will all fuse and we won't be able to see them. And they'll heal over, we can't find the wounds either. So this tree might have 15 points of taper, we just can't see them anymore. But if you look closely, you still can see 2 wounds that aren't quite healed, but almost. And then if you look closely at the lower trunk, there is a bulge in the lower trunk. Sometimes that's caused by leading wire in. We'll create a pot belly, but I'm not sure exactly how the grower got this quite large base. It might just be, again, super old tree. You can see some branch cuts that haven't quite healed. Oftentimes, people will leave branches growing out of the fairly low trunk in order to fatten the trunk, so that probably is what happened on this tree. Okay, any other anything? Okay, let's wander around and find a deciduous or two. Okay, we'll take a quick stop here. This just got finished cleaning it up, looks nice. So swing around where everybody can grab a visual. Okay, what's our species?
Hinoki cypress?
Hinoki cypress, yes. Very well done, very well managed Hinoki cypress. And so if you know about Hinoki cypress in the landscape or from a nursery, they have very large, leggy growth, but over time, with proper management, you can get the growth to really shrink down and be really nice. Okay, we don't need to do a wiring exercise for this tree. We have the tree all ready to go. Some trees really like to be more of a formal upright. Some styles, some species of trees really work well in formal upright. So this tree is that. Okay, now what about trunk chops on this tree? How many chops do you see if you look? Someone come up and look close and see how many trunk chops are on this tree. Yeah, good. There's
None?
one.
Maybe, yeah.
There's one right at the top, right at the top, right? Okay, and so how do we get the taper out of the tree like this? If we don't have trunk chops, because trunk chops is what's giving us good taper, quick taper. We don't necessarily want quick taper on a formal upright like this, but we do have taper, right? It's wider at the base than at the top, so how do we get that?
Grow the bottom branches bigger and the top branches.
Yeah, we're gonna get that over time, because this branch is providing nutrient to this section of the trunk only. This branch is providing nutrient to this. That one's providing to that. That one's providing to that. That one's providing to that. So we have more branches that are providing to the base than we do providing energy to the top. And so over time, we're naturally going to get a taper on the tree. So this is an example of creating natural, very natural taper over a very long time on a tree. And so we can get some very powerful looking trees by having only natural taper, not having like the quote contrived taper cuts. So here we can both look at a conifer and a deciduous. Is this a short leaf? What is this pine? Scots?
He says the Scots pine. I think it's Jesse's tree also.
Scots, okay.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
again, very well managed, needle size, good work. Okay, so let's do a wiring exercise on this one. So a heart of the tree, so do your wire movement. Okay, everybody got their fairly simple wire here. It's a fairly open tree. We don't have a lot of kinks and movements in this tree. And how many cuts of taper do we have? How many trunk chops do we have on this tree?
One.
Maybe one at the very, very top. So same as the Hinoki, we're building the taper that we have over a long amount of time with the branch that we have, okay? So we're not getting this dramatic, quick taper. So this tree, what kind of feeling does this tree elicit for us? Is this a quiet tree or is this a loud tree? It's a fairly quiet tree, right? It's got smooth movement. It's got gentle taper. It's a fairly quiet tree. It's not demanding our attention. This is an introvert. This tree is an introvert. Okay, let's look at this trident maple. It's a nice complementary tree to our Scots pine. Now, forests are a great place to start. If you're getting started in bonsai, forests are a great place to start because this tree is probably 10 or 12 years old. But it's probably looked pretty good for 5 of those. So you can pretty quickly get a nice looking tree out of a forest because the combined effort of all the trees, they're contributing to the look. So we just had the national show in Japan, the Kokufu 100, it's their 100th show. And if you look at the early work in the show, it's almost all forests. So all of the early show books are forests because that's what could be built quickly and easily and get into a nice show. At that point, the forests were probably 50 years old or 40 years old. They were nice enough to show to the public. As you fade into the 1980s and 90s, less and less forests in the books. If you look at a book from the last few years, you can hardly find the forest anymore in a Kokufu show because the big trees have matured to the point where they overpowered the forest as a design. And so we don't see forests as much in the shows in Japan as we do single trees. But forests are a great place to start because you've got fairly simple material and it develops fairly quickly. Trident is a great forest, a great species because it develops very quickly, grows pretty well in this environment. And so let's see how many trees. 6, 9 trees, so we have a clump of 6 and a clump of 3. And for the most part, the trees in forests, we don't really see a lot of trunk chopping on those. We're simply building the taper again, same as the Scots pine, we're building taper over time with the branches, and that's what's giving us the taper on the forest, yes.
You want me to move so you can take some pictures?
We have a couple of different ways that we can attach them into the pot. Generally, we use some sort of wire to wire them in together, and then with a trident forest, within a few weeks of repotting, the roots are beginning to merge together and they kind of hold themselves in there over time. And then we'll treat this as a single tree in the sense that we'll repot it as a single tree. We're not going to tear it apart ever really unless we have a problem or something. And we'll just repot it as a single tree. So it's sort of spaced together for the duration of its life. We're not taking it apart and the tree dies, add a tree, take a tree out, something like that over time, but generally you don't tear the forest apart. Any other questions about forests? Now I want to be careful when we work to demystify the process to not just demystify the trees themselves. These are amazing trees. There's a lot of work put into them, but I think there's just not enough conversation around how do we build the next generation of trees? How do we really work on developing the next generation of trees? So I want to focus in particular on this pine and that pine. So let's do this one first. So do your heart of the tree wire exercise on this tree on the left.
Like that. That's kind of cute. That's really cool.
Has everybody got it? Okay. Where was the original trunk line of this tree? Show me your original trunk line. I think it was something like this. And to the question from earlier about why we don't let things fuse, if you look, this quick curve in the trunk that was this one, it has begun to fuse. It's not fully fused, but this curve has begun to fuse. So we can't let this tree grow a whole lot more. So we have it in a small pot for managing foliage. We're keeping the tree small. I think originally the trunk line did this, and then we built the top of the trunk off of a branch here, and the bottom of the trunk, the bottom of the foliage pads on the tree here. This fusing trunk, though, gives us a really powerful sense of size in a shorter amount of time, because we have that trunk that's sort of fusing together. We can get a tree that looks a lot larger than its age would tell us. Even though this is quite an old tree, because we can tell by the bark. Even barking all the way down onto the exposed roots. This is quite an old tree. Any questions about the cascade? Okay, let's look at the formal upright black pine. Okay, it's actually got a little bit of wiggle, so it's technically an informal upright. And if you look at it, I think there's 3 chops. There's a chop about here, there's a chop about here, and there's a chop about here. So this is a 3-taper tree, very nice little tree, and it's not exceptionally fat. It's got a base maybe about that size. So it's not a super fat little tree, but we get really nice quick taper. It looks like maybe it's a cork bark black pine. So we're getting some really nice, and again, when we're talking about scale at this size, our taper and movement have to be much faster than the ponderosa pines. The ponderosa pine, we can have a lot longer movements of taper, but in this tree we have to have a lot quicker movements to be a lot more convincing. We can see into this second hinoki a little bit easier, so everybody can kind of see the structure a little bit. But this was a trunk line and a branch that was developed into a mother-daughter. And it looks like we mostly have a chop here to keep it short and a chop here to keep this one short, but otherwise the taper was all built by the long time work on the branch. So similar to the hinoki out there and the Scots pine, where all of our taper is coming from the combined power of all the branch work that's building the trunk.
How old do you think that is?
50, I would guess, or 40 to 50. Hey, this is, looks like a Pseudomonas quince, a false Chinese quince. This is my favorite species, I think. It's a sleeper species, not a lot of people are growing them. If you look at it really closely, it has exfoliating bark, so the bark peels off and gives this really interesting bark texture. It also kind of has a real muscly, like a lot of real muscly looks to the trunk and the branches. They do have some foliar disease problems, so you have to watch them. They're prone to fire blight and leaf diseases. But other than that, they're a great species. So if you're looking for something to add to your garden, so the Pseudomonas is a great species. Again, that's the flowering Chinese quince, not the flowering quince like Chochibai is a part of the family, but it's a different species. Okay, so let's think about this tree from a growing perspective, from a development perspective. Again, we don't have a whole lot of movement. So it's a semi-formal upright, so we don't have a whole lot of movement in our initial trunk line. And we can see that we have a chop maybe around here. And then essentially we're building, most of the crown has been built off of the, so what happens when we cut a tree, especially in the crown, what does a tree do to respond? Most species, what do they do to respond? A deciduous species especially. We make a big cut, what happens?
They backbud.
We get some backbudding, but at the cut site, what do we get? Like we kind of get an explosion of growth, right? And so one thing we have to do when we're working with certain species is we have to manage that. So we make a cut, and we get 9 things, but we don't want 9 things there. We only want 2 or maybe 3 things there. So we have to go in and select as grower developers to select down to 2 or 3 so that we don't end up with a big reverse taper. Now, this isn't a broom style, but the crown was built sort of like we would see an oak, where the crown is built off of 4 or 5 branches, which is totally acceptable in the crown of a deciduous tree, and that's what gives us this nice wide crown. You look, there's a lot of branches that are coming out in all directions. If you look in the mountains or in the fields, that's how oak and elm grow as well. As the crown, it's not a single trunk like the hinoki. It goes up to the top like a Doug fir or whatever. It's not that kind of crown. It's a crown that explodes from 3/4 up, and then you get a big, wide, nice crown. Okay, so this is a very appropriate way to build a deciduous crown. And we got that explosion of growth at the chop site, which gives us also some nice taper. Okay, any questions about the Pseudomonas? Okay, we're gonna look at a couple more. Yes.
How much levels of branching would you expect? Like primary, secondary, tertiary? Could you go on?
Yeah.
Because of the leaf size.
So the question is how much ramification are we going to get out of certain trees? So we'd have primary, secondary, tertiary, whatever 4 is, tertiary, whatever that is. How many of that? Okay, so a lot of that depends on the species. So one thing you should know about Pseudomonas quince is they don't bifurcate well. So you make a cut, they don't necessarily bifurcate for you. So there's a lot less bifurcation in this than you would see in an elm, for example. An elm or a hawthorn or a trident or a Japanese maple are going, you can bifurcate. If you look at trees from Achien Nursery in Japan, you might have 25 bifurcations from the trunk out to the tip, or 40 bifurcations. We're going to see a bunch of bifurcations. The Pseudomonas quince is one that doesn't tend to do that. So when we talk about judging trees, especially at big shows, we don't judge the Pseudomonas up against an elm. We judge Pseudomonas, we judge this tree up against the best version of this that this tree can ever be. Okay? So we don't say that this tree, even though it only has, maybe 5 points of ramification out to the tip, this tree is a junk tree because that one has 10 points of ramification. We don't judge them that way. We say, if we have the ideal perfect tree, which is a 10, then where does this fall in the species? And same with the junipers. We look at the best juniper that we've ever seen. We see what kind of movement it is, and then we're judging the other juniper against that juniper. We're not judging it against a pine, a big fat pine with a nice bark, because they grow differently. So with the Pseudomonas, my favorite tree that the Coca Cola this year was a Susadonia. So I got to study it up close. It was a very large tree, but it had been worked on for probably 75 years, and it didn't have the kind of ramifications we would expect out of a Japanese maple, but it was a very powerful tree. So yeah, you will see some trees that have a tendency to ramify, and some trees that resist ramification. And the Susadonia quince is one that resists ramification. So we have to figure out how to deal with getting the best out of that species that we possibly can. Okay, let's look at a couple more. This looks like is this a what is this? Honor?
Looks like it.
Honor maple.
Seriously? Is that what it is?
You would think as a grower I would know everything, but I come to different regions of the country and I do not recognize that tree. So this honor maple, and then next door to it is a hornbeam. These are both excellent trees. Let's start with this one and we'll finish with that one. This is possibly a collected tree or a very old tree, okay? And we can tell that age by the bark, by the way they have fusion on the nabari, by the age of the trunk. If the bark extends out onto the branches, and especially very far out on the branches, you know that that's a very old tree. So even if you have nice bark, but the branches don't have bark, then you have to assume that the branches are fairly young. But in this tree, the branches and the trunk have bark. This is a very nice old tree. This tree has kind of a haunted house feel to it, to me. Like it's powerful in the sense that it's that age is really contributing to the look of this tree. And so a lot of times, one thing that we need to do with our trees is just let them cook, let them get older. One thing I recognized in my trip to Japan this time that some of the pine trees in the show, they had weird branches in it, stuff that I might have even recommended as a professional that you would have cut off if you brought it to me 50 years ago. Oh, you should cut that off, it's a weird branch. But if you fast forward to 50 years, oh, okay, that's actually a really interesting element to the tree. It just needed that 50 years to have the branches coming out this way, and then this branch did this all up in the interior. Okay, well, we might have recommended you cut that off, but add 50 years to that, and it's like, okay, this is a very interesting thing. So in some ways, don't always cut off everything that you think doesn't fit the bill or is wrong. Leave some of that stuff on to cook a little while and see what it does. Any comments about the arm? Now, talking about different species like the Susadonia quince and the honor maple being totally two different species. The Korean hornbeam sort of falls into, these are quiet species in the sense that they don't really ramify all that great. They're not strong growers, they're fairly quiet growers. The honor maple is a fairly quick grower. But you'll notice on the honor maple that we do have a little bit of dieback. So some of the branches haven't woken up from the winter. And some of that is just natural for older trees. The older trees will die back, branches will fall off, especially if it's been in the pot for a long time. So don't be too concerned, but this is a signal that the tree is weak, or that it's just a certain type of species. If you grow a lot of birch, then you're going to have dieback in the tree. You just have to deal with that in your life because birch die back. But with this tree, if we start seeing dying back, then we might want to put the tree into a larger pot or put it into a box for a few years, increase its fertilization, and it might have to sit there for a couple of years and bounce out of the show area. Let it live in a different part of the yard and take a little more care of it over time. Because some species just don't take as well to being in a bonsai pot as other species. Okay, I think we'll go here to this. We'll just go over one more here to this. Okay, I'm tired of talking. Someone tell me about this tree and how was it designed? How was it built? Tell me what you see.
He's the owner of the tree. Right
now. Got the owner of the tree. Well, then someone else tell me what it is. We don't want the owner talking to us about it. How was the tree built? Was it primarily wired or primarily cut?
This tree was chopped.
Wow, this is a very loud crowd.
This tree was chopped.
Yeah, the tree has chops, right? So where was the first chop? Someone from this side, tell me where the first cut was. It was right here. You can't see it unless you're looking at it from this way, but we do see the evidence of it, which is strong movement that way. So we had a trunk line was going this way, and we had a branch going this way, and cut it, and so now the trunk line is going that way, okay? And then someone from over here, tell me where the second cut was. It's a little bit deceptive, but it's right behind it right here. So actually the trunk line did this, and then we cut. So that strong curve actually comes from 2 cuts. So come around the tree and look at the back side of the tree before you walk away from the tree today. You'll see 2 rapid cuts, and that gives us a really nice strong curve, right? And then we probably did have a little bit of wire, because I don't really see one. This movement was probably created with wire. I don't see a cut here, so that movement was created with wire. Okay, and then where's the next cut? It's right here in the back again. So we had a really strong vertical. We cut it, and then we get this part of the trunk. Okay, so we have 1 quick 2, a wire, a quick 3, and then the top is 4. Okay, but yes.
So on each cut, how does that get the tree to be like, I need to start moving this way and then this way?
So someone lend me your wire. So, the question was, how does the tree know to go that way? We don't let the tree make any decisions. We make all the decisions for it. Okay, so here's our tree. This is a hornbeam. Someone else lend me your wire. This is going to have 2. Okay, here's our seedling. Everybody see our seedling? So this is our trunk line, and then branch. Everybody get that? Everybody understand that? Deciduous branches like to grow up first. So this is something we can do, and I walk around the show and look at this with an eye for getting trees to look older. How do deciduous seedlings grow? What's the relationship between the angle of the branch and the angle of the trunk on a seedling, deciduous or conifer, really?
Whole branch goes through.
On a seedling, though, if you go by a 3-year-old seedling, how's it going to grow? Up, right? This is the angle of every species almost, right? And so when you look at a bonsai tree and this is the branch angle, then what does that read to you immediately? That the tree is really young. Because what happens, let's fast forward this oak. This is an oak, by the way. Let's fast forward this oak 50 years. What happens to this branch if it survives? It's just going to get longer and longer and heavier and heavier and longer and heavier and longer. And then what's the very tip going to do? The very tip is still young and strong, so it's going to go up and find the light, right? And so all of these branches are going to do that same thing. So if we want our trees to look older, then we want to bend the branches down, and we want to create a nice angle here in order to give us, again, the illusion. This art is an illusion in a lot of ways. This art form is an illusion. So we want to give the illusion of an older tree by making this angle a lot more acute. Now, if you're doing subalpine firs in the west, then this is the angle of all of your branches. Okay, but y'all don't have subalpine firs out here, I don't think. So if you have like high mounted trees, we want a really sharp angle. If you've got some deciduous trees, maybe they're going to have kind of, down at the bottom and then horizontal, and then as we get to the top, they're going to get vertical. So it kind of depends on the species, but generally we don't want them all to be like this, right? Okay, back to the original poster's question. How do we get it to go that way? This is how we get it to go that way. So this is our seedling, and this is what we're going to do. We've got our initial trunk line, and then, okay, so we're going to add a little bit of movement to that trunk line, and then we're going to take this one and we're going to add a little movement to that one, and then we're going to cut the tree off right there. Okay, so that's how we get it. We're planning this before we before we make the chop. We don't just let fate decide. We have a branch there that we turn into the next trunk line. Okay, and then someone else give me your wire. I'm going to slowly accumulate all of your wire today. Okay, and so then this cut is going to make this branch go really strong. And we're going to get a bunch of buds out of that cut. So here's a bud, here's a bud. And then we're going to cut the tree again right here. I'm going to actually just turn that into the new trunk line. You get that we made a cut, right? So we're building a branch, and then we're cutting to the branch, and we're building the next one. So then we're going to add a little wire to this trunk line, and then we're going to have another branch that we're going to cut to. So we have to be playing chess and not checkers when we're building trees, because we need that branch to be there so that when we cut, it's there. Now, some things like an elm broom, we have a stub like the one over there. We have a stub and we cut the stub and we let fate decide, and we're going to build the tree off of fate. But I don't really like how fate builds trees in my yard. I want to manipulate that according to my plans, and so I'm playing chess in my yard and building the trees as we go. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, any other questions if you're interested today? But I'm going to be talking about wound healing because when we talk about these chops, these cuts, these are creating big wounds. And I'm going to talk a little more this afternoon when I talk to the whole club about healing wounds and stuff. But this is really important. So this is what we say, we as in my bonsai family. If the tree will heal the wound, then we want to heal the wound. Okay, so what are trees that will heal wounds? Name off some species. But if you look in the fields, what species do we see in the St. Louis area that will heal a wound closed if we make a cut? Maples, hawthorns, oak. Yeah, oak is a little slower, but it will heal a wound. Okay, what else?
Cypress.
Cypress will heal a wound. Okay, what are some species that will not heal a wound very well? Ginkgo doesn't heal wounds. Hackberry doesn't heal wounds. Ficus will heal a wound. It's slow. They will heal. Think about species in the west, or Mediterranean species. Olives don't heal wounds. The first tree we looked at, junipers, don't heal wounds, right? They quarter themselves off and they leave the dead wood to be dead wood, right? Now, really, young junipers will heal the wounds closed. If you cut a shari line, it's going to heal it closed. But it would be multiple lifetimes to get that juniper to close up the dead wood, right? It's not going to do that. It's not how they work. So, with those species, we have to be creative. On a pomegranate, we have to be creative about what we do with the dead wood. We might carve the dead wood. We might leave a little hole in the tree. We might do some things to it. But generally, we're going to cause problems to ourselves if we try to have deadwood features on trees that would heal themselves. And why is that? Why are they healing themselves instead of leaving themselves exposed? What does the olive know that the maple doesn't?
It leaves itself open to pests and fungus and pathogens.
It leaves itself open to disease and problems, but also what's the hardness difference between a maple and an olive?
Softer wood.
Yeah, it's softer wood. So the olive is very hard. It's very sustainable over a long period to have olive wood exposed, whereas other trees, they're softer wood trees. I mean, maple's pretty hard, but it's as a tree, a standing tree, it tends to rot away, right? So we don't have a sustainable design if we leave the tree to rot away. So on a maple tree, we want to heal that wound, keep out disease, keep out rot, and close that wound closed. So on this tree, we have a mixed garden at the beginning. I was talking to Henry yesterday. I think this is maybe a squirrel attacked this tree. We've also got a number of chops. So our next move on this tree, rather than like carve it out and create an interesting hollow, which you do see a lot, but that's just going to cause rotting problems overall. We want to work hard to close these wounds up, close them up, and so that we have a sustainable design when we're working on the tree. So we're not always having to change the design to accommodate the rot about parts of the tree. So if you would like to join us this morning, or this afternoon, or tomorrow morning, we're doing a workshop on how to close wounds. But I really encourage you, if a tree will heal a wound, if you see other people healing wounds, then really work to heal wounds on the tree rather than giving up and carving it out and making it a rubber hollow or something. Okay? People we came with. And that's the same as species. We're not going to try to make a bald cypress into a cascade. Okay, what's going to happen if we turn a bald cypress into a cascade? We're going to be constantly fighting it forever the rest of our lives, okay? So these little elms, they love doing this. They love sending out a bunch of sprouts. And so we can fight those sprouts to make a single trunk trees. There are some nice single trunk elms, but this is a great example of using the tree's tendency to create a really nice composition, right? So the tree has a tendency to send out a bunch of things. At some point there might have been a tree chop in there and we got a bunch of response from that, but this is a great way to utilize the tree's tendency. So one thing about learning how to do bonsai and learning how to do it really well is to learn really what the tree is looking to do, what it wants to do, how it will feel, again, trying to figure out what the tree is going to do naturally and then work within the confines of that tree. Of course, we can break out in some direction in some ways, but really learning what works well rather than fighting against the tree over and over. And then this is silverware. We don't see silverware much. Gumi is the Japanese name. It's nice to Gumi. These are evergreen deciduous. Some places I do use these, but okay, any final questions here? I think I'm probably going to close up shop.